Now, a couple days ago, I reviewed the Mark II of the DT1990, and in that review, I said that the DT1770 Mark II actually had bigger improvements compared to its first generation. And I think that's true. Today, we're going to be reviewing the DT1770 Mark II. If you are interested in this headphone, there are links down below, and they sent this out along with the 1990 for review, but they're not paying or asking me to say anything good or bad. All thoughts are always my own. Now, this review comes with a caveat and a surprisingly big one that I didn't really anticipate, which is that amplification on this headphone matters so much. Your experience with this headphone will differ anywhere from overly bright to overly bassy, just depending on your amplification. So you're gonna wanna play around with amplifiers a little bit. I'm gonna name a few options that I think are really good, but I can't name every amplifier that's good and every amplifier that's bad. That being said, this sees some of the same physical changes that the 1990 had, being a new textured faceplate, which I actually think looks better than generation number 1. It has some color and badging changes and an updated driver with a lower 45 ohm impedance. It's kind of funny actually, in the review of the 1990, a lot of people were saying that it's a downgrade in terms of looks, and I actually agree. But I actually think that this is an upgrade for the 1770. I think this slight textured finish, and I think this slight divot in this ear cup here just makes this look really nice actually. I think this is a very attractive closed back design personally. That being said, I still have the same complaint that I had all those years ago in generation number 1, which is a little bit of heat while wearing it. You won't really notice at first, but after wearing this, especially gaming in it or doing a long studio session for a couple hours, you're gonna notice. The isolation though is very good. It's pretty well isolating for a non-noise canceling headphone. So because this differs so much with different amplifiers, it is sort of hard to review this because let's say, for example, I'm listening on a MacBook Pro. This is an overly bright experience actually. It's not super bassy sound. It's still got a lot of bass, but the top end is just a little bit sharper. It's a little bit harsher than I would like, and this is a bright headphone. So you kind of have to find a little bit of a middle ground here. And I'm gonna give you my opinions on what I think the middle ground sound is, on what it will sound like on most equipment, and it's good. This is a little bit more of a fun tuning, a little bit more V-shaped than the 1990 is, but I think it actually pulls it off really well. The quality of the sound on the right amplification is really, really good. As a quick side note, if you're considering kind of owning both of these, one as an open back option for maybe at home, one for closed back or travel or something, these do a pretty good job of what I would consider a carryover sound, where you're gonna be listening to something that sounds pretty familiar. It's not gonna be as open and as wide. It's a little bit more V-shaped than this headphone is, but you're still gonna see that these are sibling headphones, which I think is impressive, and they get a lot closer to each other than the previous generations did, which I appreciate. That being said, this is a very intense sounding headphone. It's very focused, it's very in your face with its sound, and some songs and some use cases, this is really good, and others, it's not so good. Let's start with my least favorite aspect and move up to my most favorite. The mid-range. Regarding its tonality, I find this to be a tiny bit dry. This is a fairly sterile sounding headphone, which I guess in a studio headphone you'd want. For hi-fi use, it's not super great, but as a studio headphone, I can understand why they would want this tuning, but I would also personally just prefer a little bit more variance for kind of vocal texture and timbre. A headphone that's like about double the price of this, but is very, very good at that is the ZMF Bokeh. The vocals on the ZMF Bokeh are delicious sounding, and this is a little bit less than preferential, I would say. I think the users that aren't going to like this very much are going to be the hi-fi crowd. The vocals don't pop out significantly. They don't have quite as much presence as the new 1990 does, but I actually consider the vocals to be better than the previous 1990 generation 1, which is interesting and far better than even what I remember from years ago, the 1770, they were not good, and they're a little bit better here. That being said, I don't dislike the vocals here. I just think that they're maybe not perfect for the asking price. In summary, I would say the vocals they're very factual and they lack a little bit of soul that I personally just want. Now bass. Like I said, it really depends on what you're listening to. So this headphone ends up varying a lot, but on most amplifiers, this is a very bassy headphone. The bass kicks in a very strong way. It makes impacts for things like gaming super enjoyable. You feel the impacts, you feel the bass response a lot. You physically feel your ears fluttering. So it's pretty fun for anything that's like bass driven, anything that's really heavy on bass. Movies, this is really awesome with, and gaming, this is really awesome with. I also think that they did a much better job this time around of separating the bass from the mid-range. So occasionally when you have a mid-bass bump like this has, where it kind of comes across really thumpy. It can bleed into the lower mid-range. And then when you're just listening to something casual like a podcast, you'll hear this like boomy sound that doesn't sound natural, and it's too deep for like a normal voice to be able to do, especially if you're listening to like an SM7B studio microphone. But this seems to be able to separate those. So when you're listening to a voice, let's say the Joe Rogan podcast, just as an example, you aren't going to be getting that boomy characteristic. So it seems to separate quite well. And then when actual real bass from an instrument comes in, you will notice. Now the bass quality is excellent. This is on the top end of quantity for me. I don't think I'd want much more, otherwise it would drown out too much of the other the rest of the music, but its quality is really excellent for a closed back headphone, and its quantity is as well. So if you're a bass head, I think you'll love this headphone actually, especially if you pair it with a darker amplifier that quells some of the high end a little bit. Now the treble ranges a lot depending on amplification, same with the bass, and it feels crispy on most things. It's a fairly active treble response similar to the 1990. If you complain about things being too bright often, you'll probably find this too bright. If you like a more technical sound, a more lively treble response, I think this headphone will be fine. I haven't seen any official graphs yet that will show me exactly which frequencies are high and low in the treble response, but it feels active to me, and it kind of finishes up that kind of V shape after 10,000 hertz. Luckily, similar to the 1990, they've done a lot to reduce 8K, so there isn't nearly as bad as a peak as there used to be with the sharp S's and T's in a voice. This comes across reduced to the same amount that the 1990 was. They did a great job of tuning that out of the headphone while still maintaining a very detailed treble response. Speaking of details, top 5 for this price range easily. It's probably top 3. It's a very detailed headphone in most categories. The places that are hard to access the detail is mostly the mid-range. It just doesn't pop through enough to really have you get a great sense of all the texture that is available on certain headphones. But regarding detail for bass and treble, this is top tier. It's very good. Now, soundstaging is going to tie into gaming, but I do want to talk about hi-fi a little bit. So this is a closed back headphone. If you're looking for extremely wide soundstaging on the perimeters, you're not going to get that with this headphone or most closed backs. Open backs are going to be the way for you if you want that. That being said, this is a very focused and intense headphone, which means that even for a closed back, the soundstaging is a little bit compressed. Now that feature paired with an insane imaging capability makes this excellent for gaming. And I've racked my brain over this, but I truly think that this is probably the best closed back gaming headphone I've ever tried. Second place to me would be the Odyssey Maxwell. Now, while the soundstaging can be advantageous for games, I actually found that for whatever reason, the background compression here for that soundstaging kind of being sucked in a little bit just works for me with this headphone for games. If you're looking for immersion, I don't think this is the best closed back to get that. But if you're looking for something that is purely performance-based, I think that this is the best closed back that I've had for gaming here. Speaking of gaming, I have the same recommendation that I had with the 1990 of pairing this with a shit gunner, which is about $200. So if you have the budget for it, if you want a really, really, really good $800 audio system for your gaming and audiophile needs, this is a very good pairing, especially if you throw on like a mod mic. And it doesn't have an overly bright or overly bassy tuning on this amplifier. It actually kind of hits right in the middle for me for sound of what I would expect for this headphone, so it sounds pretty good for music too. Now the bass actually adds a little bit of fun, but I've noticed that as sound in games gets better, they're starting to use bass and treble more to define especially physical height. So things that are upstairs are often muffled in the high end and a little bit bassier because you're hearing that kind of low thud of a footstep. And because the bass is so good at representing and the treble is so alive and active, you can position very well and you can understand not only distance from you and directionality, but it's very easy to understand the height factor for a game that is well tuned sonically. So for gaming, I actually find this to be a wildly good headphone. So overall, my conclusion, I'm impressed to see the changes that they made from generation number 1. They cleaned up the bass response a little bit. The mid-range is definitely an improvement. It's not perfect, but it is an improvement. The reduction of sibilance is a massive gain, and the treble feels less spiky than the previous generation did from memory. That being said, the 2 use cases that I would personally recommend this for is gaming and kind of just like editing use case specifically. It's not going to be giving you a very warm and lush sound like some of you are searching for from your headphones. And so if you're into that type of sound, or a more like traditional hi-fi sound with, you know, really big sound staging and stuff, this may not be your cup of tea. So yeah, that's my conclusion. That's my review of the DT1770 Pro Generation number 2. Thanks for watching. You can find links down below. Thanks, Bear, for sending this out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.